Hello, and welcome to episode 26 of AI Insights, the Executive Brief. I'm Ben's AI avatar, here to kick off today's discussion. In this episode, Ben Bohman himself sits down with Scott Small, Director of Cyber Threat Intelligence at Tidalcyber.
I'm really starting to realize that there's pretty much no typical path into cybersecurity these days, and I'm very much in line with that. So always been interested in technology, but really my entire background has been focused on that intelligence piece of kind of my role and title right now. So I actually did academic studies in intelligence studies, and I got my start in my career actually focused on physical security threats. And
in this episode, Ben and Scott explore the intricacies of cybersecurity, threat intelligence, and the role of AI in defending against evolving adversaries.
And so I think one of the top areas that our executives are focused on and concerned about right now is quite honestly this security tool proliferation and getting to the point where it's so easy to lose track of everything that you have in place and to constantly make sure that it's working as expected and not, creating some potential gaps or exposures. That's certainly, I think, the most notable and concerning piece.
So let's dive into this insightful conversation and see what Scott and Ben have to share.
My name is Scott Small. I'm currently Director of Cyber Threat Intelligence at a company called Tidalcyber. We're based in the DC area. We build software that's designed to help organizations operationalize threat-informed defense. And that's focusing on adversaries' behaviors and aligning and optimizing your defenses directly in line with the threats and the techniques that they use.
Awesome. Scott, thanks for jumping on with me today. I really appreciate it. Be a fun conversation. I mean, obviously what you're doing and what you're involved in the cybersecurity realm of things, let's just say you're probably keeping busy. There's never a dull moment.
Never a dull moment.
Right. But let's first jump into kind of your introduction into cybersecurity. I think everyone has whether it's technology or cyber, some people start with tech, get into cyber. Some people jump right directly into cyber. So what was your pathway into more of that cybersecurity aspect of things?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm really starting to realize that there's pretty much no typical path into cybersecurity these days, and I'm very much in line with that. So always been interested in technology, but really my entire background has been focused on that intelligence piece of kind of my role and title right now. So I actually did academic studies in intelligence studies and got my start in my career actually focused on physical security threats and risks. Okay. Really kind of the parallel that's run really throughout my career has been focusing on it's a very complex and difficult task, but trying to quantify threats and risks. So trying to put something like a 1 to a 5 score into this really nebulous and complex area of threats and people and adversaries that are trying to come after us, and especially the ways that they're going about doing that, just trying to track those and trying to kind of determine what are some of the priority areas that we should focus on. So that's what I started looking at in the physical security area, looking at things like terrorism and even drug trafficking and shipping theft. And now that's transitioned over into cyber attacks.
Yeah, so this is interesting because as we talk about physical security and cybersecurity used to be very disparate, right? They were two completely separate things. They didn't really maybe touch each other, but very, very little, right? Now you're kind of seeing a merger or somewhat of a merger and more complementary aspects of physical and cybersecurity. Have you seen that same kind of evolution where you're starting to see them? They're not one and the same, but there are similar aspects to them.
There's absolutely similar aspects and a lot of parallels, both in terms of kind of tracking it from a threat and intelligence perspective, as well as from a defensive perspective. So certainly there's probably the most obvious overlap, which is the focus on operational technology right now, which is a very real and growing concern because OT, I think we typically think about it like industrial, power plants and utilities, and that's very much a concern, but just all of our connected devices. It sounds corny to say, but literally everything throughout even our house truly is a potential part of the attack surface. So there's the direct overlap there. But also just looking at different attack vectors, and especially the ones really focused on the non-cyber aspects. So social engineering and that human vector is really an ongoing concern right now. And there's lots of ways to simply trick somebody to get into a building if we're talking about physical security risks, or to get into their machine, their laptop. It's a major key vector from both and kind of all angles, the human aspect.
Yeah, it used to be that the perimeter might be the firewall. It was very easily to, maybe it's your web, getting into your web or protecting your, your web servers. Now the perimeter has really shifted when you think of, I mean, are we the perimeter now? Like how do you look at that perimeter aspect of where are we protecting? Where are we starting from?
Yeah, I think that's really pretty accurate. We are both as humans, and then even just our home networks. I mean, again, a topic that's kind of been beat to death at this point, but it's here to stay. This hybrid working environment, and maybe shifting even more so towards working from home, that opens up so many attack vectors. Really, quite honestly, one of the most serious risks right now, which has definitely received some reporting, but I don't think probably enough in line with the scale of the threat, is kind of this crossing over of the work and the home environments. Meaning, if you have a work laptop where maybe you are doing a little bit of personal browsing, or I've seen definitely cases where kids, are using it. It's maybe a more high-powered machine, but that hopping on there to do a little bit of gaming or online stuff. It's a massive attack surface. It's so easy to download malware. We're going full circle. Obviously, a lot of talk back in the day about malvertising. That is a top attack vector right now. You do a web search, and the top ad link is not actually going to the software you're trying to download, but it's going to malware. That's expanding the attack surface. And if you're logging into work accounts on your personal laptop, or kind of vice versa, there's a very direct way for malware to kind of cross-pollinate and impact, enterprise environments, which is traditionally where my company and I have been focused.
Yeah, it's interesting as you have more, I guess, those BYOD, right? Bring your own device environments. And a lot of times I feel like businesses do feel like that they're protected from that home network, even if they have a VPN or other things like that. But you're right, you download the right type of malware, the wrong type of malware, not right type, but the wrong type of malware. And now it can, I mean, whether it's a keyboard tracking, different type of things, but it can actually gain passwords and access to the network. And then you add kids to it and so many other factors. That's difficult. That's a difficult problem to have. Now, how are you seeing executives as far as from a decision making, from how they're looking at cybersecurity right now, overall concerns? And I know this will be nuanced to who you're talking to, or within your range or scope of expertise. But how are you seeing executives having to handle this cybersecurity and physical security and this overall conversation from different attack vectors and all these problems we have?
Yeah, for sure. So true. I mean, this is one of the things that I and my company focus on, but we focus on it because we know it's important. So I think one of the top areas that our executives are focused on and concerned about right now is, quite honestly, this security tool proliferation, and getting to the point where it's so easy to lose track of everything that you have in place, and to constantly make sure that it's working as expected, and not, creating some potential gaps or exposures. That's certainly, I think, the most notable and concerning piece. There's also the spend and budget piece of it as well. These tools are expensive, and when you're deploying them at scale, often pricing is based on how much logging you're doing, how many endpoints you're tracking. These things are really expensive. So there's also this need to, from a budgetary standpoint, justify and continually optimize what you're putting into place. So with this, truly believe, obviously I'm biased, but truly believe that the attack surface is massive and the threats are growing. But with that, there's been a huge focus on just putting into place more tools, which has just exploded the budgets. Again, the amount of things to kind of keep track of and make sure they're actually all fine-tuned correctly. That's a huge focus right now, is the optimization piece.
Yeah, it's interesting. We go into this conversation and everyone talks about their risk appetite, right? Like, what is your risk appetite? Well, sometimes everyone's risk appetite is zero, right? Zero risk. But what does that budget look like? And then as you're trying to come up with the, specific solutions and ways to protect, I think, to me, correct or elaborate, but I look at proactive and reactive type of services, from risk management, threat management, things like that are more proactive, and then reactive things like ransomware protection, EDR protection, endpoint or managed attack, which are more like, hey, an attack's happening, let's stop it. And then there's also this risk aversion, which is, hey, look, this is a vector that you haven't noticed, and let's be proactive about it. And I think the more proactive you get, the more expensive you get, but you're also covering more of your bases. Does that align, or what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's all pretty accurate. And the challenge with the further shift towards proactivity, I guess, is just I feel like in many cases you're that much more prone to potentially disrupting or creating a risk of disrupting business operations and economic operations. The way to stop any security threat is to remove the attack surface. So let's turn off our laptops and unplug them, and then there's no longer any exposure. That's the way to make sure that a threat can't happen. Obviously, that's not practical, and that's a very extreme example, but it's not too far-fetched because I've done a lot of work in the space of looking at indicators of compromise and trying to proactively look at what command and control servers actors might be using. You can't go out and block connections to all of these websites proactively because you're not going to be able to just conduct business. And that really does kind of vary on the type of organization and business, but with so many large enterprises, they don't even have to be the biggest companies in the world. There is just so much need to be connecting with all this different infrastructure and throughout the web that you can't just kind of shut everything down. So I think that's a big challenge there. Just to elaborate something that I've definitely seen, this very much goes back to my original focus on physical security. I'm just a huge believer and becoming even more of a believer in again, a term that's maybe been overused, but layered defenses or defense in depth. You have to have all these pieces of the equation. We at Tidal focus on a pretty specific area of security. It's especially looking at behaviors, which tends to trend more towards endpoint. You need to have all of it in place. You also need to be looking at vulnerability, exposure, and patching and indicators of compromise. There are just different approaches to different parts of it. Some can be more automated. Some is a little bit more manual in terms of security, but you need it all, unfortunately.
Yeah, that defense in depth is an absolute must. And again, that cost. You bring up something else I think important as we talk about the ways we're making decisions is very often that performance aspect of how cybersecurity impacts performance isn't looked at. I know ZTNA is very popular, and it's good. In a lot of cases, it's good, but it can also slow down performance. And I think Gartner came out with a report. I can't remember what the number was, but most every ZTNA option significantly slows down or can impact performance. So now we're measuring cost, we're measuring our risk appetite, we're measuring performance. There's actually a lot of things that come into making this decision, right?
Yeah, there absolutely is. And on that point, one of the things that I think I find most interesting is we're constantly engaging with our customers and our users. There is no one size fits all template for any aspect of security, zero trust or firewalls or patch management. There's no one size fits all for any aspect, but certainly kind of writ large. You will talk to extremely large and distributed and dispersed organizations that do have systems and protocols in place to be able to, pretty widely implement something like zero trust. And you talk to small organizations who aren't able to, or big ones that were certainly a very kind of complex environment. But I think that's one of the obstacles and why we see some pushback against certain types of security approaches is because maybe the vendors or the community at large makes it seem like this can all just be done at scale for every type of organization. And there's just all these business, again, nuances to enterprises where it's just simply not the case. There's so much kind of fine tuning that has to be done for the specific organization that you're defending. And there's not clear cut guidance on how to maybe make those customizations, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially when the vendor model doesn't fit into a hybrid type of environment, right? And I think that's what we're seeing is a lot of hybrid environments. Now, ultimately, there might be some advantages to having a vendor who can accomplish most of, but what I've also found is there's not a vendor that accomplishes all of. And if the vendor in a lot of cases say, hey, we can do everything, it can, I'm not saying they're not out there, but it might cause a little bit of concern because it's okay, you can do everything, but how well do you do everything? So there is that balance of now efficiencies and how well does the company perform and what is their core expertise, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Efficiencies as well as redundancies, both good and bad ones. I talked for a while earlier about the need for optimization, and that's absolutely probably true and most top of mind. But there's this also need for redundancy. Even the most well-developed tools and the ones that kind of are doing the best for you in a given moment, they can, and I believe you have to count on them failing at some point in time. And so this is not easy for most organizations to do, especially from a budget standpoint, but wherever you can, you need to have some backups put into place as well. Big proponent of, again, this is not easy to do for small and mid-sized organizations, but to be going out and testing, or we typically say validating your controls as well. Something I believe in the physical realm as well as in the cybersecurity realm. So any elements where you can go out and make sure that something is working as expected, you truly cannot take something for granted. Even if you're doing something like pretty advanced, handwriting queries to detect threats. Literally, all it takes sometimes is a typo, a single character in one of those queries, and your search or your detection essentially could fail or not work as you expected. And so, to go out and try to test as many of those as possible, as quickly as possible, it's what I advocate for.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely a proper approach. Now, I do want to talk about, get your thoughts on AI's impact in the cybersecurity realm, of course. But first, let's talk about Tidal real quick. What was the entry point into cybersecurity for Tidal? Is it the same? Has that mission remained the same? Has it grown? How is it different from when Tidal started to where you guys are now?
Yeah, for sure. So the company was founded, our three founders all came from the MITRE organization. It's a nonprofit that primarily supports government entities. And they all were either extremely directly or maybe one step removed from a project known as MITRE Attack. This is a kind of catalog of adversary behaviors. It's kind of setting out to track to a certain level of specificity kind of the known ways that adversaries can carry out attacks. And that certainly does include looking at ways that they stand up infrastructure or even develop malware, but it's especially focused on once they've kind of achieved access, what are the ways that a bad actor can go about doing malicious activity? So this kind of knowledge base, some people call it a framework, it was really good at allowing organizations to say, here are threats and tactics, techniques, and procedures that I care about. What it's really good at doing, kind of for the first time at scale, is saying, how do I pivot or translate from those specific behaviors into defensive capabilities? Mm-hmm. So what aspects of my security tools or maybe even my policy mitigations let me defend against these specific techniques? That is all kind of tracked and documented in this knowledge base. What the founders found and what I saw as actually a practitioner at the time, came to be a big believer in the MITRE Attack knowledge base, is that organizations kind of struggled to actually operationalize and implement it. It had so much promise, but because maybe of its size and the level of abstraction that it existed at, organizations struggled to really kind of put it into place. And so that's what the founders were working to do originally, and what our software and our solutions are designed to help kind of organizations do. It's a lot around just kind of tracking all the information that exists that maps to MITRE Attack right now and making it, at the end of the day, just more usable for kind of an average security operator.
Yeah, simplifying that, if you want to call it framework, I guess, possibly, but it's robust, right? MITRE is robust. It can be overwhelming. So simplifying that and then putting it into an aspect that works in the business, I think is huge. That's a huge advantage. Now, what's your customer range look like? Are you guys, this seems like it could be good for mid to enterprise, but maybe SMB. I'm not sure if it fits down into that range, but where are your customer ranges from?
Yeah, so it's actually increasingly we're seeing interest in kind of the smaller and medium-sized organizations. Traditionally, and certainly what is still is the case is right now, is that it's more of a game or a tool for larger, more mature organizations and enterprises and the security teams within them. And that's kind of just a function of reality, I guess. The organizations that have the teams to be able to understand a knowledge base at that scale and try to implement it right now. But what is happening in those cases are they're using MITRE Attack for kind of a range of use cases, especially in kind of the detection, engineering, threat detection, and again, that offensive security kind of testing aspect. Those are the types of teams that have those capabilities to begin with. So it's more plug and play. Where we do see a lot of interest and opportunity is for the smaller and mid-sized organizations to be able to prioritize. Maybe they're actually building a security program, maybe for the very first time, to be able to prioritize, work your way down that list of these various control frameworks, NIST CSF, NIST 800, the CIS controls. All of that kind of content can be mapped to, there are like over 600 MITRE ATT&CK techniques at this point. Depending on the type of threat profile that you have as SMB, you might be able to prioritize certain elements of what you're putting into place, even from kind of a quote unquote cyber hygiene aspect. So there absolutely are applications there, and we're seeing more interest there as well.
I mean, absolutely. As you're simplifying something as complex, and you're talking about the MITRE framework, and then you get into NIST, and now you're talking about other frameworks, and then there's frameworks within frameworks. Yep. And simplifying that, especially from a small business where they might have someone on who's tech savvy, but they're not a CISSP, or they're not like, the certified security person. I can definitely see how that would be useful, because now you're taking something that would overall be, for the most part, be overwhelming for most technology strategists or your typical tech strategist, and giving them something that makes sense, and giving them, it sounds like, actionable items to address concerns and vulnerabilities within their network, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's both kind of the initial putting into place of a lot of these hygiene measures and controls. And honestly, I mean, it sounds so easy to say this: put into place basic asset inventory, patch management, and implementation, password policies, maybe multi-factor authentication. It sounds so easy to say just that. What I really think is kind of a trend right now is the need to go back and reevaluate how all those things are functioning in the enterprise right now, even if you're a small organization. And a lot of this is going back to kind of the modern working environment and the attack surface just being what it is and constantly shifting and changing. Digital transformation, shift to working from home. You need to now also put in place the cyber basics, but then go back and reevaluate even those over time. Again, there's so many opportunities for existing security controls to shift from underneath you. And it's kind of easy to maybe miss some of those. So you need to go back and check to make sure even the basic measures are working like you expected or hoped they would.
Yeah, that is, just excellent point. I love it. Okay, so let's talk about a different type of transformation right now going on in the world, the AI transformation. And start off by saying, I know, and I hope most of us know, that AI and that framework, I talked about a framework, the framework of AI has been being used in cybersecurity for a decade or so, right? Maybe 2012, maybe a little bit earlier. But this is something that I find interesting in the cybersecurity conversation, because in November, when AI really started hitting the corporate world and ChatGPT and everything became popular, all of a sudden everyone became an AI company. Right now, we're AI. This is AI. It's like, no, you're still using the same behavioral analytics, machine learning, and everything in there. But what we do see as AI is advancing, there are becoming some maybe newer use cases, or expounding on current use cases, whether behavioral analytics or even reporting, other type of ways to stop. Also, and I know this is a loaded question because I want you to kind of expand on all this, but also attack vectors and open up new attack vectors. You talk about social engineering and things like that. And that's definitely a problem with AI, with deep fakes and other stuff. So anyhow, overall, and we'll just keep elaborating on it, but what's your thoughts on AI right now and cybersecurity, AI in general, and where we're headed?
Yeah, well, I think you really hit on it, because it's become such a kind of hot button keyword. Like, everyone's kind of talking about it, and it's very, very relevant for cybersecurity right now, but in many different and oftentimes like not directly related ways. So to kind of unpack where it's relevant for kind of our space and our focus on the industry, and maybe us specifically right now, definitely from the cyber threat intelligence side. So what I'm very specifically focused on, you're absolutely right. So AI and machine learning and even just data science generally has absolutely been used in this corner of the industry for probably, I think you're correct, maybe roughly more or less 10 years. Yeah. So what it was kind of initially used for was, I think, a lot of assistance with kind of extracting elements from any of the data and information sources that you would be using as a threat or intelligence analyst. One thing that is, I believe, quite actually problematic within our part of the industry is something like threat actor naming conventions. Every vendor that's producing CTI out there likes to typically name threat actors in their own different way. And there are very good reasons for this, but it has kind of proliferated to the point where it's a real challenge for people in the operational space. So something that machine learning, at least, and certainly AI right now, was very good at was kind of being able to recognize some of those maybe naming convention variations and being able to associate them back to kind of the same thing. That is honestly something that's a very, I think, practical use case for ML and AI, and it honestly does save security operators a lot of time. Where we're seeing kind of the expansion right now from the practitioner standpoint, this is pretty narrowly focused on what we do and what we're focused on, but it's a great application of AI. It's this recognition of those adversary behaviors in something like unstructured text. We actually mostly lean on public threat reporting to do a lot of the intelligence analysis that we use. There has been an explosion in the sharing of information in the public domain. This is a really, really good thing.
Yeah.
These reports are growing longer and more detailed, literally like by the week and by the month. So being able to process those reports and certainly opportunities to do kind of overall high level summaries of them. We can maybe dig into that one. I have mixed feelings about that. But if we're trying to recognize a specifically defined MITRE attack technique in that report, that's something that AI is fantastic at and humans are really, really bad at doing. And so that's a huge area where it's a great application. It dramatically saves, us as practitioners time in consuming these intel reports.
Yeah. Man, I love that thought now. And it's actually something I didn't realize that there was a public share of a knowledge base of threats going on. I think one of the big disadvantages that we've had is that the hacker community is open source, meaning that they're sharing all this information together. They're strategizing together. And it's like this collaborative effort to just, again, open doors. Well, this other side hasn't been open source, right? It's been this closed off where if you take the players back in the day, right, virus protection like Trend Micro, McAfee, Norton, maybe Kaspersky, and several more, right? ESET, all these different virus protections. Well, they were keeping it to themselves, except for the virus definition database, which was on and off. But it was, you know what I mean? It was just this closed source. But now right. The only way that we can battle against the hacker community is for an open. So I hit up talk a little bit more about that, because I think this is interesting and it's needed.
Yeah, for sure. So it's the corollaries on both sides because, yeah, exactly. Like actors are now kind of leveraging AI for their own purposes. I'm sure we'll get into that. But then there is definitely kind of the flip side where we're starting to kind of move a little bit in that direction. I'm very truly excited for kind of the level of sharing that we are seeing right now. Yeah. So truly, and this is actually something we've hit on some of the things that we've shared, some of our reports as well. There is this, relative explosion in the amount of information that is being shared from all the vendors. All of it, I think, ultimately, or the very large majority, is driven by positive purposes, getting this information out there for other organizations to use. There is this element of kind of the marketing angle too, which I think is driving a little bit of it. But at the end of the day, it's, I think, pretty clear and easy to spot what is valuable information and maybe what has ulterior motives. Putting that aside, a lot of it's being shared. Government advisories, agencies, certainly, I would say truly being led by the United States and some of their most immediate partners, but truly around the world, governments sharing more and more of this information, increasingly detailed and kind of quote unquote tactical level intelligence. So indicators that have been observed and all the way down to specific, behaviors that have been observed. That information is useful for defenders to be able to compare against their own telemetry and say, hey, is this something we've seen before? Maybe is this benign activity, but adversaries are using it to blend in. Yeah. And then the other kind of the two broad buckets are intel vendor sharing and increasingly actually independent outfits, essentially, that do independent investigations into breaches, and they are sharing a lot of information as well. I think the most well-known one is an organization called the DFIR report. It's a team of digital forensics investigators, and they do truly some of the best reporting that's out there. And almost all of it is freely shared back with the community. Rich in detail and useful for kind of defenders and operators. So again, going back, it truly becomes a challenge of just kind of being able to process all this information, and different areas where AI and ML are stronger or worse in this, but there are some very clear applications where it's really good and really helping out a lot.
Yeah, that's so key. It's exciting, and even to learn about that. Another one I wasn't aware of, so I'm excited to look them up right after we get off this. I think that's very relevant. And I think another thing, you talk about the behaviors of reporting and dialing through all these different, again, reporting structures of open source, closed source, whatever it is. Very useful. I think another thing when we're looking at behaviors, especially with cybersecurity, and I was mentioning all these old school like Trend Micros and Norton, that they had a very signature based approach to stopping an attack. If it was in the database, it was going to stop the attack. If it's not in the database, it's not going to stop the attack. And I think as AI continues to advance, and it's already being used now from, different endpoint vendors, but they're going to be able to start collecting more information of behaviors of computers and really understanding quickly what a behavior does. We are predictable. We're not predictable. We are overall predictable. Even the way I use my computer every day is overall predictable. And I think having those behavior analytics as well to say, like, look, Ben never goes out to Romania. That's an extreme example. Or Ben never does this on his computer. Why is this suddenly happening? And I think that's going to be a way that we're going to be able to stop. And again, we are kind of using that right now, but we're using that. But looking at the behaviors of users and computers and then stopping things that are outside that typical behavior.
Yeah, that's a fantastic call out, because that's definitely a product segment that was kind of popular at one point in time, but it was using a lot more of kind of almost, I guess, let's call it kind of the signature based approach to doing behavioral analytics, where it was relatively rigid. You had to know there were, immense depth in terms of the rules and the logics being put into place to recognize these things. But at the end of the day, it was, I would say kind of inherently brittle, because it was all kind of pre-programmed, where I think that's where the huge benefit here is to allow some flexibility in those rule sets, but looking at the behavioral analytics, because you're right, it's inherently less brittle than something like a signature or an indicator of compromise that can pretty easily change. That's why we love focusing on behaviors. But then it's like, how do you implement that, especially at a large scale when we're dealing with so many logs you might be ingesting, being able to find that needle in the haystack, or at least reduce it down to 1,000 or 100 or 10 needles that you can then go manually validate from there. Like that's the only way forward, basically. But I'm encouraged by what we're seeing already.
Yeah, absolutely. And I go back to, let's say, early 2000s. I feel like when I was an IT director, that's when this new type of virus started coming out. And so I don't know if you remember the Melissa and I Love You viruses back in those days. And those were basically the same. They were just slight variations. So the McAfee's, or whatever the signature was, I was using McAfee at that time, they would stop that one. Well, then they would go write a slight variation in the code that then mixed up the signature where it wasn't detectable, basically rename it. And so there's all these little variations, which was almost making it where the 0-day detection was almost impossible because it was so new, right?
Yeah, 100%. And that's actually the kind of direct corollary that we've seen on the behavioral side as well. So that's kind of the classic challenge with focusing on any indicators of compromise or the infrastructure associated with adversaries. It is so relatively easy to switch over to a new command and control server, or set up a new phishing domain, or, to your point, to change a single character or byte in a file and it automatically has a new hash. So if you're doing only hash or signature based detection, you got to come up with something new now. So that's a benefit of looking at behaviors, as we call them. What we are seeing on kind of the behavioral or the TTP, tactic, technique, and procedure side is that adversaries are now even changing their behaviors with increasing frequency as well. Yeah. These can be very major and significant changes, or more often they're subtle shifts in the way that once a user has executed a malicious file that's been delivered with a phishing email, the way that it kind of like unpacks itself can occur in a lot of different ways on the victim endpoint. That's the thing that is constantly being changed up by what are known as like these initial access brokers who get in a foothold and then sell it to somebody else. Those are behaviors because it's not a single indicator, it's not even a single file or script, but the way that they kind of unfold is being almost on a daily basis being changed up. So we're seeing that all shift as well. And circling back to one of our earlier points, there is kind of only so much you can do from a detection standpoint where you can't just lock down everything. Yep. So I think that's why they're always going to have this ability to revise their behaviors. They're incentivized to keep doing it. So we just have to constantly be continuing to adapt. Also kind of sounds corny to say, but it's very, very true.
Yeah, absolutely. So now let's talk about a different behavior that you mentioned earlier, which is social engineering. And I want to tie this into AI because I think this is one of the ways that AI is going to dramatically, it's going to cause more risk and maybe it's going to help us as well. But I definitely see a lot of risk with deep fakes and things like that. I like to use this example. I'm going to share this and then you can elaborate on AI and social engineering. So out here in Las Vegas, there was a casino and someone called in and convinced the cage manager it was like $250,000 to take $250,000, put it in a box, drive it across Las Vegas and drop it off at a gas station. They had somehow convinced them and had enough knowledge, insider knowledge and everything where the cage manager was like, okay, let's do it. And so when people are like, well, my employee's not going to be tricked to click on an email, it's like, well, wait a minute. This person was tricked to carry $250,000 in his car into a gas station, right? Now you talk about deep fakes and mimicking voice, mimicking video or the personality and actual image of the person. Now I'm going to say those are difficult. You've seen my AI avatar. It still is quite a bit of work. It's not like this simple, like, hey, let's do this, and then it takes off and does it. But as that gets more advanced, you got to think that social engineering is going to become more and more difficult to identify.
Yeah, for sure. So you hit the nail on the head when it comes to kind of adversaries' initial use of AI, essentially. So this is really where I see the top concerns in the short and maybe even in the medium term. We can keep digging in. I'm not a super expert in terms of using AI to develop the code and maybe training their own models. But right now, we are already seeing cyber adversaries' use of AI to improve social engineering schemes. Maybe even a bit simpler than what you described with the deepfakes is just being able to craft more convincing phishing emails. That is very much a trend that we are seeing. I think it's honestly one of the main remaining kind of red flags for a typical user is I think most of us know these days when you see the poorly worded email from someone claiming to be someone you know they usually write with pretty good grammar, and this was kind of way out of left field, usually a red flag. But this is something that AI is extremely good at doing, and adversaries are starting to capitalize on that. So that's the one piece of it. Then if we get maybe a little bit more advanced, I think it is a higher barrier because the adversaries need to know, kind of like you said, the fine tuning that needs to take place. It's not out of the realm of possibility that folks will start to figure that out pretty quickly, but using it to develop more convincing schemes, including like voice phishing and video-based content, it's a very real concern. I think the one other piece, I don't know if you were necessarily going this way or not, but one thing that we have, this was reported, I believe, by Microsoft and OpenAI, their security partnership. They have actually reported on instances of this. Very prominent, actually nation state-backed adversaries using LLMs to support their research and their initial reconnaissance, to speed up their attempts to be able to know what a person might be, where they work, the operating aspects of the organization that they support. And that's a little bit maybe more kind of on the fly social engineering, but they have this register of information that's usually pretty accurate. We're seeing abuse of AI for those purposes as well. So more on the reconnaissance phase, but very much kind of lowering that barrier.
Yeah, I always talk about the duality of man, and then you have the duality of technology, right? Or even now with AI and cybersecurity, is every single piece of technology that's came out, I feel like for the most part has helped society, help humanity, but it all comes at a cost at the same time, where it is also used for negative things. And you talk about the adversarial cyber criminals and all these other type of attack vectors that it's opening up. So again, I think we're gonna see some amazing stuff, and we're gonna see a bigger problem. So question now, one of the things I like about, and I always love asking this question because what I like about AI is we're so new into it that I feel like there's philosophical conversations, psychology conversations to be had. Of course, what ifs, hypotheticals, and that's really where I think a lot of AI is, mostly in the hypothetical right now of what could and what could be. But I always like to talk about these the brain chips, right? The Neuralink from Musk, and I was at an event where a company had broken off from the Neuralink, and was developing their own type of brain chip. Now, of course, you talk about paraplegics. Sure, that's an easy yes. Like, let's help people move, give them a quality of life, things like that. But if you could have a chip implanted in your brain that would make you super intelligent, super smart, although you already are, but let's say just beyond everything that you could do, speak every single language, it'd make you know everything, like this constant Google in your head. Is it worth the risk of all the things that would come with it, or what's your take on that?
Absolutely not. Not right now. Not right now. We'll see kind of where the technology goes, but certainly not right now, because we see the risks with its implementation and its use right now. So sure. If I would allow it greater access to kind of myself and my life, definitely not. But yeah, there's it's such uncharted territory right now, and it will be, I mean, for the rest of our lives, certainly, and will be on that. But man, no way.
You know what always comes to my mind? I know this is a funny thought. You've seen Beetlejuice?
Yeah, of course.
When he possesses everyone and they do the whole thing, like Mambo or whatever walking through. That's always it comes through my mind. Obviously, if there's technology in our brain, there's a chance of it being hacked. And then I just imagine, like, you see hypnotists and all that stuff, that you're just walking around, then all of a sudden you start breaking out in dance and doing the Congo.
Yeah, for sure. Well, now you made me think. I wonder if ChatGPT is going to make an appearance in the sequel that's coming out later this year, next year. We'll see. But yeah,
I would not be surprised. But yeah, I think that's my biggest risk. Like whenever I get asked, like, what would be the number one superpower you could have? And mine is always speak every language. I think that's something that would just be amazing, to speak every language. And I also think it kind of, I don't know. I think there's two type of people, and I look like I'm very much in the fitness industry as well. I don't take steroids, but I know a lot of people that do, and they're willing to get that extra level of fitness. They're willing to put their body and their organs and everything at risk by taking steroids and other supplements that I don't think are safe. I think it'd be almost the same thing with this. There would be people who would be like, hey, I want to reach a level that I'm not able to obtain as a normal human being, and it's worth the risk as far as the fallout. But man, there's a lot to unpack if you really get into that, right? There's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you actually circle back to that, because it's so interesting that I do actually think is a little bit unique maybe in AI's application in the cyber threat intelligence field and discipline in general, because truly, at least boiling down to kind of security and threat intelligence, it's ultimately a lot at the end of the day based on evaluating data and information sources, your confidence in the reliability of an information source. Yeah. We just spent 10, 15 minutes talking about how useful in a lot of cases AI can be for helping this type of work. If you blindly trust this information, you are inherently kind of not doing your due diligence as an intelligence analyst. And there are so many cases, and I think there will be even as the models improve, where the information spat out from AI is just going to be wrong. And it's not always even easy to really spot that, but I think there are ways to kind of quickly evaluate your confidence in AI output. And you need to be doing that, especially if you're a threat intelligence analyst. And I do have some concerns about maybe that not necessarily happening, to be able to give an answer to a boss and then move on. That's actually worrisome. Yeah.
Yeah. I use AI for some SEO writing. I think a lot of people do, and then clean it up after, right? Rewrite it, clean it up, so put the human touch on it. But I have found a lot of times, especially in technology, where I use an acronym, and I think I was writing one on large graphical models, and it wrote the article on large GUI models or something. It was something like that. And it goes through it, and I'm reading through it, and for some reason I got through the second or third paragraph. I was like, wait a minute, what are we even talking about here? And right now there's a lot of companies that even for just writing, for SEO writing, are just say, hey, AI, write this, and then they're immediately posting it on their SEO or on their blogs to generate traffic. But it's just creating, you're right, it's creating a lot. If you don't actually read through it and go through and like look at some of the nuances, it's a use, but there's a problem with it. Yeah. It's not.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. And then take that to the next step kind of in our field and, looking at it with code development. So concerning. So many like literal vulnerabilities that could be introduced if you're using those tools for those purposes. It's terrifying, let alone, all just the kind of ethical piece as well. So
that's actually a good point. I'm going to be on a panel on using AI to code in 2 weeks. And that's actually an excellent point to make.
And we see now supply chain vulnerabilities, software dependencies as well. And so if you're just leaning on something to kind of import a library that you have no idea if it's valid, if it's malicious, pretty much terrifying.
Yeah. It's going to increase testing. And we talked a little bit about CrowdStrike, right? And I think one of the issues is maybe it missed some testing. Something went wrong. And I think it's a lot bigger and deeper than what we can imagine. But now you're having to say, okay, we better have a very stringent testing and quality assurance if we're using that code. And we shouldn't have AI validating. It's like having the person who write the code validate the code. No, we need to have a testing person come in who validates it. So, wow, that's
the thing, because I think, as development is just growing, we're going back to the talk about behavioral analytics, like we're probably going to need to lean on some of those solutions in a lot of ways to help us do that validation. But it's absolutely just kind of potentially a death spiral there at that point, just things feeding into each other. So,
Scott, I could literally talk to you for another 2 hours, but obviously we have things that we got to do. This has been fun. It's been educational. It's been enlightening for me. It just given me so much more thought into stuff. But last thoughts for you, go ahead and take home last thoughts. Also make sure to talk about how do they get in contact with Tidal, with you yourself, or however, if they're interested in some of those services you talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me start with a couple of credit where credit's due. For folks who want to check out more kind of in this space, I'll reference a couple projects. I think maybe most notably, there's actually a direct corollary with MITRE ATT&CK, but focused on AI right now. It's known as the MITRE Atlas framework or knowledge base. Google that and it'll be the first result that you land on. So that's kind of tracking potential attacks against and leveraging AI for malicious purposes. So go check that out. When I was talking about threats and adversaries that are using AI right now, there's a single kind of knowledge base that's being tracked right now. It's a single security analyst and researcher. She's doing an amazing job. Rachel James, she's got it all up on her GitHub page. It's called Threat Actors Use of Artificial Intelligence. So huge credit due there. She's doing a great job tracking this. Go check that one out. And then for Tidal ourselves, so we do a lot of community sharing. So if you're interested in adversary behaviors at all and a little bit trickling into kind of the AI space, give us a follow. We're on LinkedIn, Tidalcyber.com. We have a freely available community edition of kind of all the threat and defensive content that our team puts out as well. Do a lot of posting myself, probably most notably on LinkedIn. So Ben, thanks so much. Really enjoyed the conversation. Had a great time chatting with you.
Awesome, Scott. Thanks again. And I will talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks.